Hi, everybody. Welcome to season 5 of Soul Things Podcast. I am so excited to be back. 2 years of grad school is way too long. Oh my goodness. For those of you that are new here, I just want to do a little plug. So Soul Things Podcast is dedicated to people in their 20s going through really hard things. So I sit down with experts like Kelley and other people in the therapy field to help us navigate this crazy decade. So without further ado, let me introduce my guest for the season premiere. So my guest today is Kelley Oldham. She holds extensive experience in the field of psychology, working with adolescents and adults. Kelley is a licensed clinical professional counselor in Illinois, and she graduated from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology with a master's degree in clinical psychology. She worked at a therapeutic day school and private practice. She has very extensive experience in the field. And she's the current owner of a private practice here on the north side of the city in Chicago, Cultivate Counseling, where she specializes in women's issues, trauma, and anxiety. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Kelley Oldham.
Hello.
Welcome. How
Thanks
does it feel to be here on our couch today?
It feels great. I'm super excited to be here. My first podcast.
Yes.
So happy that it's yours.
Oh, I'm so happy you said yes to this. Okay, so we're doing a new segment for those of you that have been with the podcast for a while, where I'm asking my guests to talk about some struggles that they've gone through, right? Like, struggles are not exclusive to this decade, and we know that we're always learning and growing as individuals. So yeah, what are some of the things you've been learning about your current hard spaces?
So I am 39 right now, almost 40. So my 20s were... I was 20, almost 20 years ago. That's so wild. I think you feel 20 for a really long time in your life. But so I'm a mom of 3 girls. I'm married. I have a business, and I love so many of the things about my life. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the current struggles that I have is how not to be so busy.
Yeah.
And I know that is not about the decade you're in. I think that is something that we're all struggling with. Yeah. I remember in my 20s, my mom quoting Dallas Willard about hurry. And she says, we must ruthlessly eliminate hurry. And the concept of that in our modern culture, which has so many benefits, right, is... It's a lot of work to choose not to be so hurried and rushed. Mm-hmm. And, it kind of goes with our theme today, but I have learned so much about the slowing down, the small moments, and pursuing a life that is slower, that is kind of resistant to all of the things that are calling our names. Mm-hmm. And so that's one thing I've been really curious about, and trying to really feel myself when I'm in a hurry, and to kind of slowly pull that back. What are the things? Being busy is not bad per se, right? We want full, beautiful, passionate lives, but we want to not be too busy, that we can't do the things that are probably really important to who we are as humans.
Yeah, I think that's great. I definitely relate to that struggle of the schedule feels like it runs your life versus you running the schedule. So I can imagine getting married, having kids, like all these things that a lot of people in their 20s end up stepping into. It's like, help me, Kelley, what do I do? Like, how do I make sure I get all this stuff done? Like, there's necessities that need to happen, but how do we find that balance, right? Like, we could talk probably a whole hour about that topic alone.
We could, right? Grad school.
Yes. Ooh. Let's talk about grad school. Yeah. that would very much fit into the topic. But Kelley did touch on the topic for today, which I'm so stoked about. It's curiosity. And some of y'all are like, what are you talking about? I don't struggle with curiosity. Like, why is this your first topic? Well, I think a lot of us in this decade, and you can speak to this as well with your experiences, we're so like freaking hard on ourselves. Like, I feel like when we're trying something new, or like we're struggling in our job, or maybe like our friends don't like us or whatever, it's like we are our own worst critic. It's the age old saying that, like, right? Like, we're harder on ourselves than other people. And as a therapist and a new therapist, I see this with all of my clients across the board. Self-compassion and like curiosity is like the hardest thing. So our topic today is curiosity, right? So we are trying to understand and explore sort of like the antidote a little bit to this struggle that we face, right? So it's like, especially in the therapy space, this is like a foundational piece to the work that we do with clients. So for you, Kelley, like, what does curiosity mean to you, and like, why is it important in therapy?
Well, I think even some of my therapist friends, we sort of joke with each other when someone's saying something like, let's be curious about that, almost to a fault, right? We don't answer the question, but we want to be curious about the question.
Yeah.
I always say too, like the word willingness sort of kind of matched up to me when I was thinking of that, like a client who's really willing to participate, kind of matches that curiosity about themselves. And curiosity to me is a real spirit of wonder and wanting to know. When I think of it in the therapy world, when I think of it in your 20s, I think of just sort of a kind posture towards wanting to know why, how, what are these things? And like you're saying in your 20s, your 20s, if we're going to go into Erickson, it's really formed on relationships. But I think the identity is something that, especially with this culture, right? And you're on your Instagram and who am I? And all of these things. And we want to rush to those answers. We want to know. And the spirit of curiosity is often slow and not often with a direct answer. And so all of those things, I think, really kind of meld into why it's so good to be curious about ourselves. And why it's hard, right? I think our first reaction is often something critical about ourselves. And that kindness you might give to me is kind of withheld for yourself, right? When we're curious about different parts of ourselves. And we see that as therapists all the time. But if we're not curious about ourselves, how can we be so curious about our clients? And so it's sort of this rule, right? How do I weave this posture more into my life? So.
And I love that term posture, right? Because it's like a lot of it is so foundational. Like we just need to position ourselves into space, right? Like let's just take that first step into curiosity. Like, so a lot of the stuff we'll probably talk about today and on this podcast, it's so easy to talk about it, and to actually do it, it's like so hard, right? It's like, if you really knew me, Kelley, you wouldn't be saying this stuff, right? It's like, we're already talking to ourselves, listening to this podcast of like, all right, yeah, but like the judgment is providing us something. And that was a question I was asking my listeners earlier this week, is like, what is self-judgment providing for people, and self-criticism providing for people, like consciously or subconsciously?
What a good question. As a therapist, I love to know what is underneath, right? She's laughing because we talk about that a lot, right? What is underneath? What does the self-judgment give us? What is it protecting you from? I mean, it's easier, it's quicker to be judgmental of yourself. What are you protecting yourself from versus sort of this curious wonder? Or like, we don't want to know. We've been curious and it's hurt. People have rejected those parts of ourselves, right? And so we are creatures of avoidance. We want to avoid that pain. And so if we can just be hard on ourselves and get us into the right lane that we want to be, it's more automatic, right? Like you said, the posture, the switching, it's such a practice. Our first instinct, might be that judgment. But what if I notice that that's what I'm doing? What if I heard myself and I kind of switched and I thought about what Brenna was saying, like, oh yeah, oh my goodness. And to sort of, I think a lot of people in their 20s are feeling, shaky on certain things. Like this is a common experience, kind of that going back to that curiosity and kindness. But yeah, when you're emerging into the world, you're kind of getting out, if all went well and you're getting out from under your parents' wings and you're kind of trying to spread them, right? Of course, you're hard on yourself. It's like more instinctual. So you can we want to kind of pull ourselves back in. And so instead it's like, what could I do if I could just be kind about this phase of my life?
Yeah. It's almost like, it kind of sounds like motivation for a lot of people. And I think I'm speaking for myself. It's like, all right, if I got a full list of things I need to get done, or I'm stepping into something I'm insecure about, you know, I'm walking into something, it's almost like you're right. It's so automatic, but it's also like, well, it's like served a helpful purpose in a way, right? Like we always talk about in therapy, like adaptive versus maladaptive, right? Like it's providing you something, it's helped you survive and get you to this far. But a lot of the work we do with clients is helping them not just survive, right? Yeah. It's thriving. And so it's like, we're asking you to take away this, I don't know if armor is the right term, but we're asking you to take away something, but like there's actually other ways to motivate yourself to get to do things and to step into new things and to like, you know, your sense of self and the person you're trying to become. Like curiosity, again, is that posture. It's just simply inviting a new way to do something, right? Yeah. Like you're not like, I think so many of my clients get afraid of like, well, I'm just going to be lazy then, or I'm not going to be able to do anything. Like, you know, and it's like, there are other ways to approach yourself.
Yeah. You sparked something in me when you said that, because as a mom working with children and adolescents and, you know, young adults, the way we learn how to do new things is by trying them, right? And so if curiosity isn't something natural to you, you've learned other ways that work.
Yeah.
Right? Which is fine. I mean, it works to just kind of be hard on myself instead, to be critical of myself. And so it's if you can think of it like learning a new skill, like, oh, there might be a better way to do this besides being so critical, besides comparing myself, besides X, Y, and Z, whatever works. And inviting in that thing it's kind of like a practice. It's doing something new and learning a new skill, just like a toddler learns how to walk, right? Crawling worked for so long, but now we're trying this new thing, and hey, this kind of works better. Yeah. It's hard. I fell 25 times, but
yeah. I love that you bring in the metaphor of the child. It's something I love to do with my clients because I think it just gives so much perspective. There's a child on the screen over there as we're talking about it. You know, it's so funny. My client said something the other day that I actually like learned something. I was talking about this metaphor. Because she's very hard on herself, a lot of criticism, a lot of self-judgment, and we're just kind of exploring that. Like again, I was inviting her to be curious about it. Like, yeah, I wonder where that's coming from. We kind of connected it like to her dad and just like his approach to being harsh, and so she kind of lives into this reality of like, I need to earn my worth, and that's what fuels her being like hard on herself, right? And instead of being curious. And I was comparing it to a baby. I'm like, well, a baby's not productive. Like a baby actually causes, like, it can prevent production, right? Like it's got a lot of needs. And then she said something. She's like, yeah, it's like, when did I lose my value? And I was almost brought to tears by that statement, because it's so true. I think underneath a lot of what we're talking about here is like, okay, like, yeah, like you feel like this is going to motivate you. You feel like you're not enough. Like there's all these underlying values, but it's like, when did you lose your value? Right? Like I just found that so profound. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it goes with sort of this lesson I'm learning, right? Productivity, being busy, getting the letters behind your name, whatever it is, right? Like, oh, that's my Instagram account, my likes, my job, all these things give us value, and it works. Yeah. Until it doesn't work, right? Yeah. Until it does not work. Oh, that's like an insatiable thing. And so it's like, how do I hold my value as just like a human? Yeah. Created in God's image. Like what if that was like my root? Yeah. Right? Yeah. It's such a hard trap.
Yeah. And it's such a long journey. Like we said, all this stuff, it just takes so much time. And again, going back to that child metaphor, I was thinking about this idea of how a lot of times our brains are like black and white. Like we were trying to make sense of the world. We want labels. We want yes, no, good, bad. Like our brain is just doing what our brain does. Yeah. And I feel like curiosity is so funny. It's like the gray. Right? Like it's like so childlike. It's like when a kid sees like a bug, they like explore it, and like it's like their innate like curiosity. It's just such a beautiful thing to see them like playing and creating and doing all these fun things, and they're not like beating themselves up about what they're doing and then it's gradually, it just like, as you get older, it starts to wear on you. Like the curiosity kind of fades away.
Yeah. I know, having little kids in school and the stuff they learn about, it's like the fun stuff in science. And I just find myself like the wonder in their eyes. It slows you down. I mean, curiosity, when you think of that on the scale of how we discover the world, I mean, the world is just full of beautiful, wonderful things, like miracles happening all the time. Yeah. You know, when the leaves fall off the tree in the fall, like, I'm like, are they going to come back? Do they know how? Like just these things that we don't have to depend on and like are just beautiful and can wow us, the things that we've discovered, the vastness of the world, of the ocean, right? Like these beautiful things to be curious about. And yeah, what that's like, the state it puts you in when you're curious, right? Like, how do you feel when you're in awe and kind of, you know, in wonder of how things are working? Like, that state is such a nice place to be.
Yeah, it's like my chest isn't tight anymore and I don't have anxiety when I'm being curious. So what we've kind of been touching on these things sprinkled throughout the conversation, but what does curiosity like provide people, Kelley?
Yeah, I think it can provide a lot of things, right? I think it can point us towards beauty, which is just so important, right? And just everywhere, and healing. I think curiosity, when we're as a therapist, when I think of just young 20s kind of in my office, I think it can really point towards healing, right? Like if we can be curious about, you know, if my kind of point of view of why we have problems is because we're creatures of avoiding painful things and affects, right? If we can be curious about that, I mean, that can really push us into like changing unhealthy patterns. It can push us into sort of wondering why we are the way that we are, right? Like this is just like, it's like the avenue in. And you know, it's really nice when someone's curious about you. It can open that up in you a little bit, right? When someone's asking questions. Oh, I find when people are just like digging, I mean, people would normally like that, right? But man, you can just talk about yourself for a while. But like that true curiosity to your inside, you can't like force that onto someone, right? Like that is something that I think we have to, it's like a state of being in. It's an experience we can have. But yeah, I think that you can't force a person into that. That's kind of a posture that is important to think about. Like, do I let myself go into this place?
Yeah, that's so true. I was thinking about that question as well. Like why even be curious? Like, what is it going to do for me? Like, what purpose is it going to serve? Like, I'm fine just like beating myself up because it's like helped me be productive, which is like praised in like my society. So why on earth would? And so I think that's awesome. I think the person I'm trying to grow into is a lot of like humility. That's my word for the year. So every New Year's I do like a word instead of like a resolution, because I don't go to the gym enough to stick with that. But yeah, I think it's just so interesting because I think when you're in that posture of curiosity, you can't help but like step down for a second, right? Like it's coming from a place of down here instead of up here of like, like you're almost like just being an observer of yourself, of other people, right? Like we're kind of talking a lot in the context of self, but this also applies to other people, right? Because that's what we do as therapists. You just said that, like we're just curious about people. We ask them questions about themselves and they love it. Sometimes they hate it, but most of the time.
Sometimes they do hate it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, curiosity is I think as a therapist, right, it's so essential in kind of how we change and what we do. But yeah, I can get the resistance to wanting to be curious. It feels like the opposite of productive, or it feels too nice to ourselves. Yeah. I think we're kind of like, no, we can just willpower it and do it. And yeah, we talk about a lot too, just kind of the people, like parts of ourselves and what drives us, right? And so what are the messages, if someone is being curious about you, or you're curious about a decision you made or a feeling you felt like, oh, I should be happy about this, but I'm feeling all this anxiety inside, and you kind of have this posture of curiosity, and or you move towards that. And then you just let yourself wonder, like, what is going on here? Am I letting myself be curious? Am I being hard on myself here? And kind of getting to know that part that's driving you and resisting the curiosity or letting you have it, like that, the part of us that drives those decisions we make, you know, you can call it your inner child, your inner critic, your non-conscious problem solver. All of these are kind of coming from a mentor of mine. And he would always kind of be bringing you back to that question with your clients and with ourselves, right? And on both sides of the sofa. And that's such a good thing to kind of engage if you're having a hard time being curious, right? Yeah. Like, what is going on? Being curious about why you can't be curious, okay?
I love that. Because it sounds like ultimately what you're saying is it opens the door to self-discovery. Like being curious, like you're leaving a lot on the table by being like judgmental versus being curious. Like, and I think that's something that hit me in kind of researching this topic and thinking about it is like, oh my gosh, like, yeah, like criticism can only get me so far. And then it's like curiosity opens this door to like all these other things of like, oh my gosh, I'm so frustrated. I get so anxious about this thing. And then it's like, my gosh, I wonder what's going on in there. And then you discover these things about yourself, and guess what? Like you could, like the anxiety lifts a little bit. Right?
I know. What are we so afraid of being so kind of kind to ourselves? What if you're not so hard? What's going to happen, right? Such a good question to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Will I not change? Will I not get the thing done? Will I not succeed? Yeah. Right? It's an interesting concept to think about.
Yeah. And I think that kind of touches on like the next question I was thinking about is like, you know, what are these like automatic responses we have instead of curiosity? Like a lot of it seems to be like judgment and fear. Like, are there other things that people like should replace with curiosity?
You know, I think of, and this might go down a little bit of a different path, but I think of defensiveness a lot.
Ooh.
I think of just, like our political culture.
Oh yeah.
Right? Like everyone, we don't need to explain.
Yes.
And if you find yourself passionate about something and someone's on the other side and you just feel yourself go into this like hot, defensive.
It's like visceral, yeah.
Visceral. Instead of like, I wonder why they like that person. I wonder what draws them. Like, I really respect this person.
Right.
Or they have a lot of, you know, they're like, I want you. It's so, what happened that I could not go there about a certain topic, you know, or about a certain thing. And I think that defensiveness is a big stumbling block for all generations. Yeah.
It's almost like they're trying to like protect themselves or something. Yeah. Like, oh, you're threatening me. My view, so I need to judge you. I need to like fear you. I need to like defend. Like it's this like arms up sort of approach versus like, like it's almost vulnerable a little bit. Yeah. To be curious about somebody else and even yourself.
Totally. Yeah. So defensiveness for sure. Judgment. I mean, we've talked a ton of that, right?
Yeah.
And fear. I mean, I think there's just so much compassion for people who didn't have that safety to be curious.
Yeah.
Right? Or that wasn't something that was fostered or held, or there was not a lot of space for that. And so it's scary. What if I'm abandoned? What if I'm rejected in this spot? You know, this other way seems to work for me, work enough. Yeah. So yeah, I think asking ourselves though, in different situations, like what happened to me in that moment? We probably know the answer. You know, and it's probably different for you than me. We can both have a reaction, but like our stories and who we are and the experiences we've had, that blueprint that we've had since, you know, our early years, it's driving our boat sometimes.
Yeah. And that makes me think family of origin, right? Because you're kind of touching on this thing of like, well, we like learn a lot of this stuff. Whether it's, you know, I guess peers could play a role too, but just thinking about parenting, you as a parent too, you could speak to this. It's like, sometimes it's like this generational cycle of like, well, this is how I learned to be successful, so I'm going to pass this down to my kids. And this is how I learned to treat other people. So I'm going to pass this down to my kids. And it's just, it's almost like we're even just asking people in this episode to build an awareness about some of this stuff. Like some people might not even be aware of how hard they are on themselves or, you know, and so it's like, what role does family of origin play in this development of judgment and fear and development of curiosity?
Well, I'm a therapist, so I'm definitely going to say there's a role. There's definitely a role your family of origin played. And it's not like it's not something that has to dictate your whole life. Yeah. But it's so apparent that our early relationships form so much of our relational patterns. And it can be a really beautiful and hopeful thing because it is really changeable, and often through other relationships. Yeah. And I think that curiosity, I mean, whenever I hear a client dig into this stuff, it opens me to just so much compassion for them, not judgment, right? I mean, people come in with all sets of stories, you know, that might be easily judged. And the curiosity to think about maybe why these patterns, these symptoms, whatever you want to say, have worked leads you to just like compassion and understanding and like, oh, that makes so much sense. And yeah, that space, I think, for all of us to dig in, whether we had, you know, capital T, traumatic childhood, whether, you know, you had a sort of picture perfect childhood, there's no such thing, right? Like we were impacted by certain things and we need to sort of assess those, right? And they may look really great. Yeah. They may be working really well for you, but I don't know if you are connected to sort of the motivators behind them, right?
I love what you're saying too, of just even the model of experiencing somebody else being curious about you, like the impact that has on developing the skill that we're talking about, right? Like it is a skill, like you said. And it's like, I think that's making me think too, the importance of being curious about other people. It's like, if somebody is so used to just being defensive and like critical and judgmental of others, it's like when they see that in somebody else, especially on a consistent basis with a therapist, or maybe you have great people in your life that are just like helping you explore like your life and yourself and show you kindness, it's like, it's going to be a little bit easier to develop that skill. Like it's kind of hard to do this in isolation.
Oh yeah. Yeah. We're relational beings. I remember my college professor would always say that. And it's like, you know, when people say something a lot, but you don't really get it, like, I get it now. Yeah, I get it now. Like we're relational beings, humans, you know, we're just after that. I think as a therapist, I was saying this the other day, you know, if you can't do anything, you can do accurate empathy. And therapists, we can be really annoying sometimes. We love all our theories and our, you know, we just have all these things that we want to say and do all these things. But, you know, the task of really being tuned into attunement, this idea of one person trying to understand and engage what's going on in another person's mind. I mean, that's like, it's the origins of attachment. It's what we may have had a lot of or may have had not. I mean, we've all been missed and we've all been seen, right? And so this idea of curiosity, when you put it into why people change, I mean, people in therapy don't change without accurate empathy. And so this curiosity thing that can kind of be, oh, why, Brenna, did you pick this, right? It lines up so well with how we heal, how we change, and I think how we were created to heal and change, right? And to develop, right? That Bowlby blew us out of the water, you know, when Bowlby. He came up with this idea of babies needing this attunement from their parents. And how that creates just this blueprint for healthy development.
Yeah. And I think I kind of want to go in that direction a little bit about faith. So as some of you know, listening, like I'm a Christian. I know not all my listeners are, you know, people of faith, but I think this, you can, you know, hang in there. I think, you know, we have some good points here to think about. Is a lot of, you know, my own journey and my faith and some of my other Christian friends has been like shut it down mentality. Like when I'm doing something, I like to label it, okay, this is sin, this is wrong, I need to shut it down. And I don't think it's made it harder to sort of explore things. So like, how do you navigate that tricky water of like, you know, certain faiths talking about like clear moral like boundaries, right? Of like right and wrong, yes and no. But it's like, sometimes it's like, okay, but like, why do I have this, right? Like, don't fear. The Bible says don't fear. The Bible says don't be anxious. All this stuff. I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm not like, like I'm not doing enough in this space, or, you know, and you start to like shut down these parts of you because it's not aligning with scripture. It's not aligning with your faith, instead of like, oh, I wonder why I'm anxious. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think a lot of religious people, not just Christians, I mean, it's a nice trap to fall into the lines, right? Like it says this, and so I'm just going to do this. But I don't think that's how Jesus interacted with people. You know, there was like a real curiosity of what was going on and the spirit of what's behind it, right? We keep going back into this internal motivator. And you know, willpower only works so well. And I think that's what is kind of coming down to it, right? And so I think the curiosity, like, well, it's great. Like, okay, this is sin. I don't want to do this. I'm not going to. I think you can stay out of some trouble that way. But if there's not a real understanding of how things are working internally within you, you might get caught up in something that feels like a little sneakier or totally just diving in. And so that, you know, the curiosity coming back to it, I think can really get into what is going on behind, what's driving this behavior, right? Like I'm using this as a way to avoid something, and it will probably lead you into sort of a healthier kind of pursuit of life, of spiritual life and life in general, right?
Yeah, because I think of another client. I mean, she was a really strong Christian, and she was quick to judge herself, quick to label herself if her actions didn't feel loving towards somebody else. And as I started to invite her, she was kind of say like, I'm about to swear right now, sorry, but she's like, I feel like I'm being a bitch right now. And it's like, okay, like let's take a step back for a second of like, what is going, like, why are you ignoring this person, right? Like, and you just start questioning that stuff instead of like, well, I'm not being loving, and the Bible says be loving. And it's like, maybe it's a little more deeper than that.
Yeah, right. Maybe.
And so just like inviting people to explore a little bit of like, what's going on there? Like, why are you doing that? And it doesn't mean like, oh, you should just stay doing that, right? Like people want to grow and change. But like you said, curiosity opens the door to healing, and not just, well, I'm just going to label this and fix it and get better. It's like, well, are you leaving a lot on the table by not exploring that being a bitch thing? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
But what do you think is like, so when I think about the 20s, I think about this generation, like how has self-judgment, fear, defensiveness really impacted this generation like we're talking about?
Well, I think elder millennials like myself are really hard on you, young 20s. So I'm sorry about that on behalf of us. It's just like such a pattern, right? We love to pick on the generation below us. But man, I think being in your 20s right now, I just can't kind of comprehend how difficult and wonderful like the internet is. Social media.
Yeah.
It is, I remember someone telling me like they felt like they had to have a brand.
Yeah.
And I was like horrified. I was like, what would my brand be? Yikes.
Yeah.
Even that, like, you know, like there's just something I think really hard about having to be, I mean, beautiful and a hard worker. And I mean, I think I struggled in my own way of like, am I a mom? Am I an entrepreneur? Am I a therapist? Am I, you know, like we put all these things and we miss what's going on. And in the world of like distraction, I mean, you guys are, I mean, I'm alive too, I guess. But like at the 20s, I just feel like you're like, everything is at your fingertips.
Yeah.
right? Like if you're curious about something, you can just Google it, right?
Yeah. All access. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's something so amazing about that. And then there's something so tricky about that. Like all good gifts, right? Like it comes with a lot. And I think just being distracted is a real enemy of curiosity.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I'm so upset about this thing, but I'm just going to binge Netflix and, or I'm going to go on my phone. I mean, I think it's like, it just can't be talked about enough what an enemy of some of these deeper things are. And that is it's a really hard thing to deal with. Just that constant input.
Yes. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up social media. I love talking about it in every episode, just to some extent. I don't have, outside of like, the Instagram and TikTok for this podcast, like I don't have a social media presence. And I remember for me in I think it was like 10th grade of high school when all this stuff really started picking up. Like all the cool kids. I think I lied about my age to get Facebook when I was like 11. And the comparison for me is what really got me. Like that's what shut me down to curiosity, was seeing like the picture perfect life of family and friends. And you're just like, why do I suck? Like, and then I think it fed my inner critic. Like, I think it just really did, because the sort of, and now it's just gotten even worse. I feel like because the video quality gets better, that just everything enhances, and everyone's like, oh, you're so, like, your skin is so beautiful, or like, and you're just like woe is me. Like, why do I suck at everything sort of mentality? And that's taking up my brain space. So that's why I go binge Netflix to, avoid this sort of like, I'm just not enough, like, value that is being like cultivated in that space.
I totally agree. And have felt the same way, and have tried to stay away from that stuff, but it's always there and it's pulling you in, and the comparison is the thief of joy, right? That quote is just so real. And I think it's so important for us all to always say that out loud.
Yeah. So
we know that we all feel that way, and to think about what are the things that, what is really giving me, what is really feeding my soul?
Yeah.
Right. The name of your podcast.
Soul Things.
Yes. What is this?
Yeah.
Doing that? And what is it costing me? What is the 2 hours? What is my screen time report when that pops up and you're like, oh, horrified. It was maps, I swear. Yeah. We were on a road trip. It's like, what are those things costing me in the long term? Yeah. And I think for the 20-something, that's really hard. Dating feels so hard. Gosh. I mean, I know so many wonderful single people who feel so stuck, and then again, hard on themselves. And it feels like I need to be on these apps. I need to do, I need to do all these things. I need to be getting my job. I mean, you're just at this precipice of like, life is here and look at how successful this person is. And I think that someone in their 40s who is kind of like, all right, this is where I landed and I feel good about it. Like, you forget all those questions and those desires. And I want this and I want to go in the treadmill of life and I better get on. And if I could, I wasn't a very curious 20-year-old. I was worried about all those same things, with just less social media. Yeah. Lucky me. And so I would love to give myself the gift of a slowing down and a curiosity, and like a real belief in my own human value. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, for me, I'm thinking about, okay, what are the roadblocks to being curious? And obviously social media is a big one. It seems like we're all, I think it was John Mark Comer that said we're all being spiritually formed by something. Yeah. Or even like Christian or not, religious or not, like
we're all being formed.
Yeah. We're all being formed. You can't avoid it. Sorry guys. So yeah, I guess besides social media, like what is like, why is it so hard to be curious? What is it? What are these roadblocks? Why can't we just snap a finger and be curious?
Yeah, I think it's just always asking ourselves, I think as therapists, we like to sort of put people in categories and kind of have this concept of why people change. We make it as simple as we can, but everybody walks, like, I have never been bored in my office, right? Because everybody is different. Yeah. it's just it's a beautiful job, like getting to know another person. And so what is the thing that is keeping you from being curious? There's lots of like really great tools that I think are popular these days, like the Enneagram.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a 3.
There
Do you know
go.
what your Enneagram is?
Yes, I do. I'm a 2.
The caregiver.
If you don't cringe when you don't say your Enneagram number, you haven't read it enough. Just kidding. See, there I am, right? Maybe I should be curious about that. So there's you just getting to know the parts of yourselves that are driving. It's like a fruitful experience.
Yeah, it really is.
You know?
Yeah.
And I think finding different ways, you don't have to be in therapy to do that. There's lots of different things. Having a good friend, having really good conversation, allowing yourself to do it for someone else. Sometimes it's like, oh, tell me about you. Yeah. And that might, then allow me to open up a little bit more to you. Yeah. That vulnerability can be contagious. So you could do a little experiment with a safe friend or something, But yeah, there's like so many different ways I think to dig in and start to ask yourself, why is this hard for me?
Yeah.
Or if it's like really easy for you, like what a gift.
Yeah.
How can you spread that?
Teach me. Teach me how you did that. It's almost like I kind of tell my clients a lot, like we often ask them to take the harder path. And what I'm like, it's their choice at the end of the day, right? Like everybody can live their life however they want. Like we're not going to tell you what to do. But it's so easy to just like stick with what I know. I think for me, the scary thing about being curious, and maybe it's my own personal roadblock, is just like, that sounds so hard. That's like unknown. It's scary. Like, I don't know, like what's going to happen if I go there. Right. And I can imagine some listeners relate to that sort of apprehension a little bit.
Yeah. If you are feeling that way, right, it's always, I think it can feel intimidating to just try this on.
Yeah.
It's like, how can I do this in a small way?
Yes, baby steps.
Yeah. What if I could just be curious about how I'm feeling about my evening plans tonight? How can I be curious about this interaction with a friend? See how it goes, right? I'm a big believer in journaling.
Yes. Everyone go out and get a journal after this episode.
Yeah. It's especially in your 20s. Oh, and what a gift to go back and read it. It's such a sweet spot of life. It really is. Yeah. It's like you guys are all so young and beautiful and your skin looks so good without, don't be putting all that stuff in there yet, guys. You guys are so young. And it's just like there's so much adventure, right? And you don't want to miss it. And it's like, how can I slow down to like think a little bit about that and to be a part of what's really going on? And journaling is always a really great way to do that.
Did you journal in your 20s? Was that
big regret? And my mom would tell me to do it all the time. Yeah. And so here I journaled like in high school a lot, and I have those, and they're really precious to read.
Yeah.
And it really helps connect you with that inner critic. You're like, oh,
yeah.
And I kind of stopped in my 20s. I was in grad school. I was just feeling a certain way, and like there was not enough time. And so if I could slow down and go back and do that, I think it just pushes you into another spot. And journal about the hard things, right? Yeah. Gosh, why do I do this?
Yeah. Yeah. Like, don't be afraid to explore it. Like, I think when I'm speaking about like the fear of the unknown with curiosity, it's just like, just try it. Like, just see what happens. Like, you're not going to like, what's worst case scenario going on in your head, which is probably different for everyone listening. Just like explore that. And like she said, just take that first step and see what happens. And then if it doesn't go the way that you thought, try a different way. Like there's not a perfect way to do. I hear all the perfectionists getting their pens out or their phone taking notes and stuff. It's like, just try one thing. And
think of how you've learned something else, right? Like, what's the last thing you learned? I mean,
what was the last thing that I learned? I learned how to be a therapist. That was the last thing. I'm still learning how to be a therapist.
And how do you get better at it?
Just exploration, right?
Yeah.
It's like, and that's the one thing, especially just being newer in this field. It's like, I admire so much people that have decades of experience in this space of just like, there is just a level, and maybe this also just comes with age, of just like self-certainty in a lot of ways that I think this decade brings a lot of question marks of like, who am I? Like, what am I stepping into? Like, am I good at my job? Am I a good friend? Am I this and that? Like there's just so much there that the waters seem to kind of settle a little bit as you get older. And I don't know how much of that is age and building this skill. Like how much for you did you have to kind of work on this curiosity journey.
Yeah. Still working on it. I think so. I have really great parents. I was really blessed in that way. They did not have great parents, and they have become really good parents. And I remember thinking like I was just going to like, turn 40 and be my mom.
Yeah.
And then I didn't. And I was like, oh, she had to work really hard at that. And you just get so busy. I mean, there is something about like, if you get married and if you have kids and if you're trying to do your career, I tried to do those at the same time. I mean, it is just like a lot.
Yeah.
And it can get in the way. And so if you can figure out ways to develop yourself in those things, I mean, it's just curiosity is a great one to invest in. Going slow, you could be an expert on TikTok. You can do that.
Yeah.
People do that all the time. Or you can kind of just like turn off and try to like dig into yourself. And I have a feeling that will be pushing you into this direction of growth and solitude and slowness, and which is just gives back in dividends.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of practice. I'm not where I want to be.
Totally.
It's something that you constantly kind of are moving one step in front of the other, just small amounts, right? Like they always say when you're like building habits, like to just even like, okay, this is the 2 minutes where I want to do this habit, right? Yeah. Like doing that every day, the small investments in who you want to be are just, before you know it, you'll be 40 like me. And all of those small things, the podcasts you listen to, all of those things start to add up. Yeah. And that can feel really good when you're older.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love the idea of just like, it's a slow, gradual thing. Like I think we intake these even maybe listening to this podcast, it's like, all right, I'm going to go out. Like some people might be really motivated. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to go out there. And it's like setting that expectation of like, we're going to be Kelley's age one day and we're going to be still working on it. And there's going to be things about ourselves that we're not the biggest fans of that we're working on being curious about. And that is okay. It's almost like we're talking about acceptance a little bit too in this podcast of like, it's okay. Like to be where you're at right now and you can work with that and take those small steps.
And it's so beautiful, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, the paradox of like struggles is like that, the pursuit of that curiosity, the beauty of kind of knowing the underbelly of ourselves and the dark part is this kind of like light on the other end. Yeah. And that is slow. It takes time. And I think that's one thing that therapists, the more you practice, the more you realize is like really good work can sometimes take a long time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, it feels like the most important stuff takes a long time is what I'm kind of learning in this season. It's like, all right, okay, give yourself a lot of grace in this process because, and I think curiosity opens the door to that, right? Like self-compassion, grace, like all of these things that are actually very helpful. And I find more adaptive than, maladaptive. And I think I kind of like, as we're getting ready to kind of wrap some things up, I'm just curious, like for you, like what role is curiosity playing in your life today? And maybe like if you want to take us back to 20-year-old Kelley and maybe what role did curiosity play?
I know. That's such a good question. It's good to reflect back. Yeah. I think curiosity plays a role in my life today. Is like I really love being a therapist and thinking about how people change. Oh. I think that the love of knowledge, it's just endless. It's wild. Yeah, it is. And that is exciting. Like, I wish I could go back to grad school because I think I was so focused on the results and I was kind of reacting, and a means to an end is what I said about grad school all the time. And I really regret that I went straight after college. And like, I wish I would have slowed down a little bit more to really take it in and enjoy the experience. But I think I wanted a lot of things in my 20s, and I was just so focused on how to get them that I couldn't really slow down and ask myself, why? Why? What is this thing that you want? Why do you want that? What does it give you? Yeah. And so I think becoming curious has been a process for me that I've really enjoyed. It's a lot more satisfying.
Yeah. It sounds like more satisfying, and it's like, it's making me excited of like, oh, what's like a practical thing I could do today to make myself more curious? And maybe that's a question y'all can ask yourself. And I think something I want to end each podcast episode with, and I think you've just given us so much to think about, and it's just, I just love talking to you. I could talk for hours, but like, what do you think would be a helpful question for the audience to like be chewing on maybe the next few days?
I think as therapists, we talk a lot about that, this inner child and inner critic that we all have, whatever kind of feels more comfortable, and to think about what that part of you says when you're curious, what it's going to stop you from, what it wants to stop you from, and and to just kind of like sit with kindness with that part of you. If you're having a hard time, if you think this is stupid, if you think this is awesome and it's going to solve all your problems, be curious about that part of you.
Yeah.
Maybe journal about it for 8 minutes.
First
doesn't have to be that long. Yeah, there you go. and just see where that leads you.
Yeah.
Invite that part in.
Yeah.
Be nice to it.
Yeah. What a great question to start this curiosity journey for some people. And maybe if you've been on this journey already, this motivates you to keep going and know that you're not alone in this struggle, because there's so many struggles that we're facing. So why not just be a little kinder to ourselves in the process?
Yes, I love that.
Kelley, thank you so much for your time today. I really
goodness,
appreciate
thank you for
your
having
insight, and I just love chatting with you. Thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. If you guys are interested in engaging in the Soul Things community, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, or if you don't have social media, which I fully support, you can go to my website, which I'll link below in the description, and follow my monthly newsletter about podcast releases and other helpful resources. The content provided on Soul Things Podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnoses, or treatment. Always seek the advice for your physician, mental health provider, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding medical conditions or mental health concerns.